I have read the same document more than 40 times. It still does not say what people assume. In 1953, in a small office in Bentonville, Arkansas, a man named Sam Walton signed papers that had nothing to do with stores. There was no Walmart yet. The first one would not open for another 9 years. He was a struggling operator of a single Ben Franklin, five and dime, deep in debt, with four young children and a wife who had grown up understanding money in a way he had not. And on that day, before the fortune existed, he gave most of it away, not to charity, to his own family, through a structure almost nobody outside a handful of estate attorneys ever sees. I am a financial historian. I read ownership records the way other people read the news. And I want to be careful here because what follows is history and structure, not advice for your situation. I am not your attorney. But the question that has kept me coming back to this file for years is simple. The Waltons are the richest family in America. So why has not one of them ever owned Walmart directly? Let me take you back to the table where it started. To understand what Sam Walton did in 1953, you have to forget the man on the magazine covers. There was no fortune. There was a single store, a lease he was about to lose, and a habit of caution that came from growing up during the Depression in Missouri. He watched his father repossess farms for an insurance company during the worst years, and he carried something from that. He understood that ownership and control were two different things, and that the law treated them differently. His wife, Helen, came from a family that knew this in their bones. Her father, L.S. Robson, was an attorney and rancher in Oklahoma who had set up his own family partnership years earlier. When Helen married Sam, she brought that idea with her. She used to say it plainly. The way to keep money in a family was to divide it before it grew, while it was still small enough that nobody fought over it, and cheap enough that the government barely noticed. That single sentence is the whole philosophy, and it cuts against everything most people feel about money. The instinct is to accumulate first, hold tight, and only think about passing it on once there is something impressive to pass. Helen's family did the reverse. They handed out pieces while the pieces were nearly worthless, on the theory that worthless pieces today become priceless pieces tomorrow, and the time to move them is while the tax man yawns. Sam, the cautious depression boy, found that he agreed. So in 1953, on the Robson model, Sam and Helen formed a family partnership. They put the children in as partners while the children were still in grade school. 20% to Rob, 20 to John, 20 to Jim, 20 to Alice, and the rest held between Sam and Helen. The asset inside it at that point was almost nothing. A struggling store, some notes, a name. Here is the part that matters. Sam Walton was not avoiding income tax. He was looking past his own death at something most people in 1953 had never heard of: the federal estate tax. At the time, the top rate on a large estate ran as high as 77%. Think about what that means for a company. If Sam had simply owned Walmart in his own name and built it into a giant, then when he died, the government would have demanded a tax on more than half of it. To pay that bill, the family would have had to sell enormous blocks of stock. Selling stock means giving up votes. Giving up votes means losing control of the company you built. The estate tax, in other words, was the thing that would have broken the Waltons' grip on Walmart, not competition, not a bad quarter. A tax bill it comes due exactly when a family is grieving and least able to fight. Sam saw that coming 9 years before Walmart existed, and he handled it before there was anything worth taxing. Now, I want to name the structure itself because vague talk about trusts and loopholes hides how ordinary the pieces actually are. At the foundation sits a family limited partnership. In the Waltons case, the entity has carried the name Walton Enterprises, and over the decades it was reorganized as Walton Enterprises LLC. Picture it as a single bucket. Inside that bucket sit the Walmart shares. The family does not hold the shares one by one in personal brokerage accounts. The bucket holds them. The family members then hold interests in the bucket. And this is the first layer. They are not shareholders of Walmart. They are partners or members of the entity that is the shareholder of Walmart. One step removed. Above and around that sit trusts. The most important is the family holding trust, which over time has been described in filings under names like the Walton Family Holdings Trust. A trust is not a person and it is not a company. It is a legal arrangement where one party, the trustee, holds and manages assets for the benefit of others, the beneficiaries, under written instructions that can outlive everyone who signed them. The trust can own an interest in the partnership. Other trusts set up for individual children and grandchildren can own interests too. And some of those are structured to last for generations. When you stack it out, you get something close to 6 layers between a Walton grandchild and a single share of Walmart, the individual, the personal trust for that individual, the family holding trust, the partnership interest the trust owns, the partnership itself, Walton Enterprises. And then at the bottom, the Walmart stock the partnership holds. 6 steps, 6 walls. Each wall does a different job, and that is what people miss when they wave the whole thing off as a tax dodge. The partnership layer concentrates, controls, and whoever manages it. So 1,000 family members can hold economic pieces while a few people make the decisions. The trust layers decide who benefits and when, and they can keep a reckless heir from cashing out and walking away with a chunk of the company. The personal trusts shield individual members from their own divorces, lawsuits, and creditors because you cannot easily seize what a person does not technically own. Stack those purposes together, and you do not just have a tax structure. You have a machine for keeping a family and a company welded together across generations, long after the founder is gone and the grandchildren have never met one another. Contrast that with how almost everyone owns things. If you buy Walmart stock today, you own it directly. Your name is on it. When you die, it is counted in your estate, taxed in your estate, and your heirs receive whatever is left after the bill for it is paid and the lawyers are done. Direct ownership is simple and it is exposed. Every layer the Waltons added is a layer that direct ownership does not have. Let me walk the mechanism slowly, the way it actually works. First, the entity is formed and the asset is placed inside it while the asset is cheap. This is the single most important move. You do not wait until the company is worth a fortune. You put it in the bucket when the bucket is nearly empty. Second, the founder gives away interests in the bucket, not the asset itself. He keeps control as the managing partner. The children receive economic interests, but they cannot sell the store, cannot vote the shares, cannot force a sale. They own a piece of the future without owning the steering wheel. Third, the asset grows inside the bucket. Walmart goes public, the stock multiplies. But the growth happens inside an entity that the children already own pieces of. The increase does not pile up in the founder's personal name, waiting to be taxed at his death. It accrues to interests the family received decades earlier. Fourth, when the founder dies, his personal estate is small because he gave away the valuable interests long ago, back when they were worth almost nothing. There is little left in his own name to tax. Now, the legal backbone, and I want to be precise because this is where myth takes over. Family limited partnerships are real, ordinary instruments of partnership law. Trusts are real instruments of trust law that go back centuries. None of this is secret and none of it is illegal. It is written into the tax code in plain sight. There is one technical point worth knowing by name. When you give away a minority, non controlling interest in a private partnership, the value of that gift can be discounted because a piece that cannot control the entity and cannot be easily sold is genuinely worth less on the open market. For years, this was aggressive. In 1990, Congress passed a section of the Internal Revenue Code, Section 2704, specifically to police how families value these interests when they transfer them. So the government knows exactly how this works. It has written rules around it. It simply has not banned it. And here is the catch, the part that makes this almost impossible to copy in a panic. The structure only works if it is built before the wealth arrives. And once interests are given away into an irrevocable arrangement, they are gone. The founder cannot take them back. Sam Walton could not have run this play in 1985 when Walmart was already enormous. By then, the value was massive. The gift tax would have been crushing, and the discounts would not have come close to covering it. The whole thing depends on doing it early, when it feels almost pointless because there is so little to protect. Keep that in mind because the timeline is the entire story. So let me walk the actual history with the real numbers because they are more striking than any explanation. Start at 1953. Sam and Helen put the four children into the family partnership. The children are between roughly 5 and 9 years old. The asset is a single struggling variety store and the obligations attached to it. The value transferred to each child is, by any honest measure, tiny. No meaningful gift tax is owed because there is almost nothing to tax. That is the point. The cost of doing this is lowest at the exact moment it seems least necessary. Move forward. The first Walmart opens in Rogers, Arkansas in 1962. The company expands across the South through the 1960s, store by careful store. Then comes the moment that changes the family forever. In 1970, Walmart goes public. The initial offering prices the stock at $16.50 per share in a 100-share lot. Adjusted for the many splits that followed, that original price works out to roughly a few cents per share in today's terms. The shares the family controlled inside the partnership were now public, liquid, and about to compound for decades. Every split, every climb, multiplied a stake the children had technically held since they were small. The growth happened inside the bucket they already owned. Now jump to 1992, the year Sam Walton died. He was, on paper, one of the wealthiest men who had ever lived. And yet his personal taxable estate, the part the federal government could reach at his death, was reported to be remarkably small relative to the fortune. Some accounts described it as a fraction of what an ordinary observer would assume, because the valuable interests had left his personal name nearly 40 years earlier. The estate tax that could have forced the sale of huge blocks of Walmart stock, that could have shattered the family's control, never landed with real force. There was little in his own name left for it to land on. Sit with how strange that is for a moment. A man builds the largest retailer on the planet. He dies surrounded by a fortune that would decades later be measured in the hundreds of billions. And on the day the federal estate tax came knocking, the cupboard in his own name was nearly bare, because everything of consequence had been someone else's on paper since the Eisenhower administration. The tax authorities were not cheated. There was simply nothing improper to challenge. The transfers had been made openly decades earlier at values that were honestly low at the time, and the years did the rest. Time, not trickery, was the instrument. The control passed intact. The partnership held the shares. The trusts held the partnership. The family held the trusts. No fire sale, no loss of votes. No outside raider buying up the company while the heirs scrambled to pay a tax bill. And today, decades later, the Walton family's combined fortune held inside those entities is estimated to be somewhere around $250 billion, making them the wealthiest family in the United States. Not because they are smarter investors than everyone else, because in 1953, before any of it existed, the structure was already in place to receive it. Read those years together. 1953, the structure. 1962, the first store. 1970, the public offering at 1650. 1992, the founder's death with almost nothing in his own name. Today, $250 billion inside the entities. The decisive move was the first one, made when there was nothing to protect. Now, let me tell you why almost everyone does the opposite and why it costs them. The instinct of regular people, and I include most of the merely successful in this, is to wait, to plan for wealth once the wealth is real. A person builds a business for 20 years, it finally becomes valuable, and then at 60, with a good accountant in the room, they ask how to protect it and pass it on. By then, it is too late to do what the Waltons did. And the reason is mathematical, not moral. The whole engine runs on transferring assets while they are cheap. So the growth happens in the next generation's hands. If you wait until the assets is worth $10 million to give it away, you are giving away $10 million, and the gift tax and the valuation rules treat it that way. The discounts shrink, the exemptions get swallowed. You have missed the window when transfers were nearly free. There is also a human reason the waiting feels right. When you have little, giving any of it away feels reckless. Sam Walton gave his children most of a business he was not even sure would survive. That takes a particular kind of nerve or a particular kind of advisor whispering that the cheap moment is now. Most people only get serious about structure after a liquidity event, an inheritance, a sale, a sudden jump in value. And the cruel arithmetic is that the moment something becomes worth protecting is precisely the moment it becomes expensive to protect. So the failure is not that ordinary families lack access to these tools. The tools are public. The failure is timing. They reach for the structure after the value has already arrived. When the very thing that made it powerful, transferring early and cheaply, is no longer available to them. They are trying to run a play in the fourth quarter that only works in the first. I have watched this happen in the records again and again. A family farm that could quadruples in value over 30 years. Then half of it sold to settle the estate when the patriarch dies because nobody moved an acre while acres were cheap. A small manufacturing company passed down whole, then liquidated within a decade because the heirs each owned their slice outright and one of them wanted out. The pattern is always the same. The people who lose control are not the ones who were poor. They are the ones who were rich but late. They did the hard part, building the thing, and skipped the quiet part, building the container. And so the thing they built outgrew their ability to hold on to it. Now let me be useful with a clear warning attached. I am not your attorney, and this is not advice for your specific situation. What follows is general education about how these structures exist for ordinary families, not just billionaires. The single principle worth taking from the Waltons is this: the cheapest time to move an asset to the next generation is before it is worth much. If you own a business, a piece of land, or a stake in something you genuinely believe will grow, the structure that protects it is most powerful when it is built early, while values are low. In practical terms, families commonly start with a simple entity, a family LLC, or a family limited partnership that holds the asset. The founder keeps the management role and the control. Over the years, small interests are gifted to children, often within the annual gift exclusion that lets you transfer a set amount per person each year without touching your lifetime exemption. Done patiently, a meaningful stake moves to the next generation a little at a time, mostly tax-free, while the founder still runs everything. There is a rough threshold where this stops being theory and starts being worth the cost. As a general matter, attorneys often say a family limited partnership begins to make sense when the asset to be protected is in the range of roughly $300,000 to $500,000 or more. Because below that, the legal and administrative cost can outweigh the benefit. Setting one up properly is not free. Expect to pay several $1,000s in legal fees, sometimes more, plus ongoing costs to maintain it correctly. Because a structure that is not respected and operated like a real entity can be unwound by the courts. And that last point is where most do-it-yourself attempts fall apart. A family partnership is not a magic word you say once and forget. It has to keep its own books, hold real meetings, file its own returns, and behave like the separate thing it claims to be. If the founder treats the entity's bank account like a personal wallet, a court can look straight through it, and every protection collapses at the exact moment it is needed. The Waltons did not just sign papers in 1953. They ran the thing, year after year, with the discipline of people who understood that the structure only protects you if you respect it. That discipline, not the paperwork, is the part you cannot buy off a shelf. And do not do this from a video. This is the kind of work where you find a qualified planning attorney, someone who does family partnerships and trusts as their actual practice. And you sit across the table and lay out your real situation. The Waltons did not use a template. They used LS, Robson, an attorney inside the family, and decades of careful counsel after him. The structure is only as strong as the lawyer who builds it and the discipline with which the family runs it. Take the principle. Leave the specifics to a professional who knows your numbers. I want to close where I started, at a desk in Bentonville in 1953, with a man who had almost nothing deciding to give most of it away. The lesson in that file is not really about Walmart or even about money. It is about the difference between the wealth you can see and the structure you cannot. We look at the Waltons and we see a fortune. What we do not see is the partnership formed before the fortune, the trust stacked around it, the six quiet layers that turned a tax that should have broken them into a tax that barely touched them. The visible part is the store. The part that lasts is the architecture nobody photographs. That is what I keep coming back to in these records. The families that endure are almost never the ones who got rich. Plenty of people get rich. They are the ones who built the container before they poured anything into it. By the time the rest of us are looking, the decisive choice was made decades earlier, in a year when there was nothing to protect and every reason to wait, and they did not wait. If this kind of history is what you come here for, the structures behind the names, stay with me, because the next is to older and in some ways even bolder. In 1936, a man named Joseph Kennedy Sr. built a set of trusts for his children that would fund a political dynasty and outlast him by generations. He did it deliberately, with a purpose that was not only about taxes, and the way he designed it tells you something the Waltons file does not. That is the story I will open next time. Thank you for sitting with the records a while. I will see you in the next one.